Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this second Futures debate after the first one yesterday. This time we're talking about the significant issue of the prospects for democracy, openness and equality from across the region, and I'm honoured that we have an excellent panel of, again, people who are active really on the ground throughout the region, as well as having a certain degree of vision of across different countries to address this issue with us. We're going to be quite efficient on this panel because we're getting to the end of proceedings, and so we're going to try and go straight to the point. And so, Ahmed, I'm going to ask you, prospects for democracy, openness and equality across the region. You've flown here from Cairo.
Yes.
How are you feeling about that?
Well, first let me thank you and thank SNF for inviting me over here. It's quite a privilege to be here, and I'm always like Alex Haley, searching for my roots when I'm here. My great-grandfather came from Kavala to Egypt to fight with the Egyptians against Napoleon in 1798. So, revolution runs in the family. So I'm pretty proud to be here with you among this amazing crowd. So the future of democracy in the region, that's the million-dollar question. We have several challenges post-Arab Spring. You've seen a lot of failed states come to be as a result of the Arab Spring or whatever happened due to that process. You have Yemen, a failed state, and a civil war and a failed state in Libya and in Syria. And you have a quasi-state in Egypt, whereby a military junta is now in power, and a continuation to 60 years of military rule since 1952 in Egypt. So the whole region is in a shambolic state. So if, I don't want to sound so grim after that beautiful performance. I was thinking, I feel so guilty now that I'm going to have to put that grim look on my face and present to you the dismal future of democracy in that region. But I always say that whatever happened in Santegma and Plaza del Sol in Spain, and Occupy movements all around the world, and Egypt, Libya, Yemen and Syria, is not detached, but rather our generation stand against the neoliberal capitalist, aggressive capitalist world order. It's our generation's stance against that shoving of consumerism down our throats. And this is why the slogans were very similar in many of those protests. It was freedom, dignity, and bread and butter for all. It was the fight for social justice. And this fight continues. As I just mentioned, my grandfather came from Kavala to Egypt. My grandfather from Morocco, on the other side, was part of the revolution of Abdul Karim Khattab. So it seems that this part of the world is in continuous movement of fighting for social justice and democracy. And it seems it's not going to happen overnight. We were quite idealistic in 2011. I was in the front lines of the revolution in Egypt. I put together the first organizing committee in Tahrir, and we were very optimistic and a bunch of kumbaya wannabes. And little did we know that we're not just fighting a military, a deeply rooted military regime, but we are fighting more of a global war against the terror of new capitalism. So, despite what's happening in Egypt, crackdown on civil society, on activists, over 50,000 people got detained in 2 years, of which 20,000 got tortured, monthly disappearances, forced disappearances of at least 150 to 160 people every month. It seems quite dismal. Yet we have our small little fights that we've been successfully winning. We've lost the public domain for quite some time now, namely after 30th of June in 2013. But we've started regrouping and recollecting our strengths, and it's not over yet. And I want to believe that all the sacrifice that I've seen, all my friends that I've lost in this fight, all this has not gone to vain. However, having said that, the real challenges are in the endemic, systematic structures of power in this part of the world. Those post-colonial, nationalistic, militarized structures are deeply rooted in governance, and they've created narratives that suit the convenience in education. There are several studies that show that studies such as the civic education, history, religion, and Arabic language teaching in Egypt all has a militaristic character. They are all figures of the military, of military personnel in all 4 subjects, and as if Egypt's 7,000 years of history started in 1952. It was all reduced to that culture of ultra-nationalistic, militarized, xenophobic culture. Now, the civil society has not given up yet, and this is very important that we mention that there are human rights groups that under all the crackdown and the very harsh circumstances have had significant breakthroughs and battles. Although half of my friends fled the country, the rest are either in prison or in hiding. There are people who are still willing to risk their lives for that cause. And I believe that my parents, who came from the I Have a Dream generation, civil rights movement, they showed us, they shared their dream with us. And I believe that we're the I Have a Vision generation, and I hope that our kids are the I Have a Plan. And this is what I believe youth of all those movements, the Occupy, the Santanga, we know what we need. We know that change is important, where we need to rid ourselves of all those corrupt politicians and bankers. However, we don't necessarily have a plan. And many of us have a false sense of entitlement, and we want the change to happen now, while our leaders are still stuck up in the 1960s military sentiments of the Nasser era, and they believe change happened over the course of decades, if needs be. So the gap is irreconcilable. So it's either we wait for them to just wither and die, or that we try to continuously improve the scene, whether radically or collectively and gradually.
Excellent. Thank you for that. You mentioned that we ought to become the generation that has a plan. I want to turn to you, Maria, to ask, not necessarily if our generation has a plan, but maybe if the European institutions may have a plan. It's not a trick question or a joke. You might come with an answer, and how you see the situation in the region when it comes to the progress of democracy.
Sure. First of all, thank you very much to SNF as well for the invitation to be here. I indeed wanted to approach this issue from a European perspective, because that's where I'm coming from, despite personal links to the region. I think what we had today is really a security, let's say, democracy trade-off. And it's rather clear that Europe has opted to go for more, let's say, take on the security approach rather than the promotion of democracy towards the region. The first thing I want to say linked to that is perhaps rather self-evident, and is that you can't really talk about democracy in the region when you have conflicts and despair and many of the things that Ahmed mentioned. But on the other hand, I also want to stress that prioritizing safety and stability at the expense of democracy will backfire. And I think therefore we have to understand stability and democracy as rather intertwined and interconnected. I think for this reason, let me just go back to how I understand the region. And when I say the region, I'm referring to the Arab region in particular, the broader Middle East to some extent as well. Indeed, the situation is very grim. I think there's no need to emphasize that further, fortunately. And if I can use something that a former Sudanese insurgent actually told me quite recently, he said that in times of conflict, there is no shortcut to development, but only to destruction. And I think that that actually summarizes how I see the condition of the Arab world being in today. It's a state of self-destruction. It's one that is lacking hope, and one that's seeking desperately for quick solutions to problems that have really been evolving throughout decades. And I think it's in this context as well that we have to understand the growing violence, radicalization, as well as the massive influx of young refugees coming from that region to Europe. I'm sure you've seen the figures that emerged last year, that by Eurostat, the European Statistical Agency, which said that approximately, I believe, 80% of the refugees that came to Europe were under 35 years old. So this is approximately 4 out of 5 people seeking refuge in Europe are under 35. And I define here under 35 as youth. So anyone under 35, there you go. Another important thing is that in the Arab world, as you I think also know, we have a huge portion of society that belongs, let's say, to the youth. About 60% in the Arab world, and please correct me if I'm wrong, are under 25 years old. So what we're seeing basically is that a huge chunk of young people that are supposed to be, assets for building democracy and stability in the future are leaving. Either they're leaving or they're in huge despair, and they don't really see any future vision in their society, so they're looking for a future elsewhere. So just to get back a bit more to the trade-off that I was mentioning to you in the beginning between security and democracy, I think that urgent action is needed from a European point of view. And by urgent action, I do not mean reinforcing border controls or taking let's say more short-term security-driven policies to contain, the refugee flows. It's rather to, focus on how can we provide support to political systems and leaderships in the region to help them regain the trust of their own populations. This includes, how to make them more inclusive of members of their societies, how to include their members in decision-making, and gradually to implement democratic reform. Part of, again, focusing on democracy is reinserting hope into this region, which is very much needed at this time. I think that it's important also to stress that, it's not about Europe imposing such a transition. I think that we have learned from our lessons there that we do not want to preach, if you wish, or to impose something. But at the same time, so it must come from inside the region, but we have the leverage to promote economic as well as political reform, and I don't think that we should be wary of using that. So to get to the point, I think that contrary to what we're seeing today, which is this European political thinking that prioritizes security and stability over democratic principles and values, we shouldn't think, I think, anywhere that preserving autocratic structures in the Middle East will help us contain, the chaos and extremism which is affecting Europe to a lesser degree than the Middle East, but it's affecting Europe nevertheless. I think if there's anything that the 2011 uprisings have taught us, it is the fact that authoritarianism does not equal stability. And again, this is where I want to highlight the interconnectivity between stability and democracy.
Okay, thank you. Both Ahmed and Maria, in your talks, you emphasized that the motivation for change, the wave of change that came from 2011 started in a way with the youth. The youth were crucial actors, and that despite the changes since then, the youth have continued to be organized, often in quite horrible conditions, if we think of the situation in Egypt, but also in other countries in the region where the situation may be slightly less dramatic. And so I want to turn to Munir and ask you about the situation in Morocco and the way in which young people are organizing themselves there to change the structure and also the ideas of society. Munir.
Yes. Good evening and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Niccolo, for the question. Well, the first thing I have to say is that the history of change in Morocco is not something new. It doesn't start in 2011. We have a long history with change. It happens during the 5 period of revising the constitutions, and it happens also with the women movement in 2003, when it urges the whole country to adopt a new personal status code. You know, as you know, our personal status code was based on Islam, and with the women movement in 2003, we adopt a new one which is based on human rights. In competition with human rights, in parallel with Islam, and at that moment we feel that there is a change coming, and we just have to work on it. And the people who led this, the women who led this movement, were all democratic, and they belong to the civil society. And in 2011, when the whole region was in a chaos, young people were following what happens in Egypt and in Tunisia, but we were thinking on how to make it change in our country in a different way. We lived the change in our own manner. So we start thinking to create a movement which is based on a pacific spirit, not a violent one. And in that we didn't agree on the reivindications, but we know that there is something in common between all different categories. At that moment, I still remember that Islamists were asking for the religious state, Democrats were asking, or Republican were renewing their dream of seeing a republic in Morocco, and young people, all what they count for them is to have a job and good education. So by the 20 February, we agreed on three main issues. First of which is social justice. Second one is to reduce the king's power, and the third one is good education and good employment for everybody. What happens in 2011 is a struggle between the young people and the authorities in Morocco upon who gains the power, who gains the decision. And the king, in fact, was very smart in that. When the movement of 20 February addresses its demands, the king was very clever, and he responds positively to what we ask. But some people think that the king's offer, the royal offer, was much higher than what we need. At that moment, we split into two parts: people who are with the king and won't say that's enough, we are in the right path, and people who were skeptic about the things. They say, take in the street and keep vigilant, because it's not as easy as that. In the same year, we have a new government. Hard luck, unfortunately enough, with a conservative political party. And what is worse in this government is that it doesn't have a homogeneity between its parties. We have the Islamic Party, we have a socialist party, we have administrative party, and all, as if you are saying, as if all Moroccan people wings are represented in this government, but with different and sometimes opposite ideologies. Now in Morocco, we believe that if this movement brings something new, is that this pacific battle between leftists and rightists. People know that we have to change the situation in Morocco, but we believe also that there is a resistance from people who have some other interests and who are with the old situation in Morocco. So this go and back, go forth and back between these wings will last forever. And in my sense, this is one of the positive points that the revolution brings to Morocco. This dialogue between the two parties without violence, for sure. And in that sense, now in Morocco we are starting a new a socio-political movement in Morocco, which is called Amal. Amal main objective is that we are saying to people who are in the government, we are not and we do not accept to be on the same wings. We are not identical. We have to have more public spaces to show our differences, our diversity, because we are not identical. And this is what happens, and even this is what happens with Young Arab Analyst Network International, because in this program, which was led by the British Council in Morocco, and in which participated Claire Spencer and Mr. Milanese, we were different people coming from different social background with different ideologies. There were people with us who are leftists and some are rightists. There were women who are calling for new status for women. So this is the thing in Morocco. And I was talking about the Amal movement. Amal movement say that we should not be identical. And what is good about Amal movement is that it also allows the most vulnerable social classes to be with them, among which I would say people with disability. And people with disability in Morocco also benefited from what happened, what went on in Morocco, as in a movement called at that time Madous Blabina, which is in English, it doesn't go without us, it should not go without us. And our first objective is to be representative in the new constitution. And this is what happened. There is the whole article in the constitution, chapter in the constitution, that says that to change the situation of disabled people, the government has to do a public policy for them. And more than that, the preamble of the constitution prohibits every discrimination against people with disability. And now, in 5 years, we were successful to get a new law, framework law in Morocco, which is dedicated to disability. But again, we are saying that this is not the law we want. It is not based on a participatory approach. It doesn't reflect the rights which are stated in the International Convention of People with Disability. But at least we have a right, a paper on which we can base our talk with the government and our struggle. In that sense, last Saturday, we were gathering a group of young disabled people. We were asking ourselves, why do we fail in promoting the situation of disabled people? So this sense of autocritique is very important for us in civil society, because we believe that we committed errors. We have something there are some skills to reinforce, and we have to work on that in order to get what we want. That's it.
Thanks very much, Munir. Rasha, let me turn to you and say the form of organizing, the form of protests that we've seen across the region, actually, in both north and south, since at least 2011, has had one property that has been widely commented on, and that is reclaiming the square, or the Maidan, as apparently plural, open, democratic space. That strategy has shown some huge advantages and possibly also some limits to it. So I wonder, Rasha, if you may be able to speak to this role of the Maidan and maybe a little bit what kinds of things have been learnt in the spirit of autocritique that Munir mentioned, learning and thereby perhaps building a strategy or building a plan for how to go forward. What has been learnt about the square?
Thank you very much, Niccolo. Well, one of the things about the Arab Spring was this notion, this idea of the square that was uniting the youth, not just from the MENA region, but also it was like bridging. It was like a bridge between the youth in the MENA region and in Europe. And it was quite interesting to know that the square for demonstrations in Ukraine, for example, was called Maidan. And the square actually gave birth to a lot of social movements, to a lot of political parties, to a lot of hopes, a lot of dreams, sometimes despair, as we live it at the moment in the case of some countries in the MENA region. There was and at the time of the revolution in Egypt, everybody was talking about we should be hand in hand. So it was really a neutral zone where we overcame religion, we overcame gender, we overcame different ideologies. So it was a place for unification at a certain moment for the revolution. After that, unfortunately, it became also the place for division and in many times committed violence. And the project that I've been leading for the last 2 years is called Wumidan, the woman of the square. And we've been working together with different countries from France, Italy, Ukraine, Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, Sweden, and we also had different participants from Libya, for example. And we worked with this project. We tried to create, let's say, a platform for the activists to come together, because I'm Egyptian, but I'm living at the moment in Sweden. For many people, Sweden seems to be like a quiet and calm place, but it's not the case now since 2015. And there's been a lot of change going on. You feel it in Sweden, you feel it in most of the European countries, and actually the Arab Spring, which was calling for freedom, for justice, for social change in different Arab countries. I have to say, the way it overshadowed, like it's spreading its, let's say, the message and the repercussions, unfortunately, in Europe. And it shows that if you think you can live in isolation, no, it's not the case. We share the values, we share the dreams, we share the hope. My colleagues here spoke about youth. They represent the majority of the population in the south of the Mediterranean, and they have demands. Unfortunately, these demands are being, at the moment, crushed or drowned with them in this sea just right there. And we tried through Wumidan to create this platform for young activists to meet, to exchange. We're trying to move from debate also towards action. And we did our first edition last year in November in Stockholm, and we're going to have the second edition this year also in November in Stockholm. And one of the main outcomes of the first edition was the release of what we call the Wumidan Declaration. You can find it online if you look for it. And I'm going to talk more about the declaration. I will keep it till later and what are the main points that came in the declaration. But I dream of claiming back the square. I dream of living again in Egypt. I dream of being in the square feeling safe, not subject to any violence, not subject to any sexual harassment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Look, I have another couple of questions in my mind for the panelists, but actually, given the time, what I want to do is take some questions from you now, and I'm going to add my questions to them, and then the panelists have a choice what they want to respond to. So we're going to start over here. If there's a microphone, I think the microphone's coming. Okay, well, you know, we can start with you and we go that way. No?
Yeah. I think we can. This is a question probably mostly for Ahmed, but also for the entire panel. And it really goes to the sort of relationship between democracy and capitalism. Because it seems to me, Ahmed, that what you meant, you sort of had an almost antagonistic relationship between the two. And that struck me in the light of the historical experience of Europe, the United States, and pretty much every other place in the world that actually has successfully democratized also in the sense of having a constitution that's respected, yes, therefore credible minority rights, and indeed many of the things that are missing in the Middle East today. You basically need capitalists, because they are the ones who basically check governmental power. And therefore, you know, I would argue that one of the problems that the Middle East has among many is it hasn't enough capitalists.
Okay, thank you.
Has enough? Doesn't have enough.
Doesn't have enough.
Please go ahead. If you can.
I'll try this one.
Good.
Thank you. When you talk about the future of democracy in the Middle East, what about political Islam? Does political Islam have a place in it? Because it seems to me that the situation in Egypt was one that was created because of that question, exactly.
Thank you. Is there a third? Did I see a third hand? No? In which case I'm going to take these two and add my own. So there was a question about, do you need capitalists and what for? There was a question about the role of political Islam. No, the question I would like to add is much the same as one I posed to the panel yesterday, which is, this is a conference of philanthropy. However we understand that term, what do you as actors for change need from others, whether they be donors, whether they be capitalists, whether they be politicians or humble citizens? Who would like to?
Well, I didn't mean to sound a little bit too lefty for your taste, but probably it went across as such. But I'm personally a centrist, and I believe very much that we can learn from the social democratic experiences in Northern Europe, and specifically from the 60s towards the mid-80s, and then the reform of social democracy within those countries. I've spent some time in Denmark through the Danish-Egyptian Dialogue Institute, and there was plenty of good lessons learned, and I personally believe in the transformation through education. And what they call the folk education in those countries, that experience could might as well change Egypt and the Arab world. If you have critical thinking at the heart or core of education, that will inevitably be our only salvation, and as I believe it. And definitely we do need more capitalists, but we don't need crony capitalism in Egypt, and that was the case under Mubarak, where Egypt was ranked, according to a 2010 HSBC report, one of top 20 economies that the world global economy depends on. However, that booming economy only trickled down to less than 3% of the population. So we do need capitalists, but with a social heart, not just hit and run capitalists or those who corrupt the system so that they continue to benefit at the expense of the middle class and the poorer stratas of the society. And going back to political Islam, and that's not an easy one to tackle. The Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis are not going anywhere. They're a big portion of the society, and pushing them on the ground again, it only exasperates the problem. I remember I had a call from a friend from the military intelligence 3 days before the crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood. And he asked me, what do you think? I mean, this is the younger generation in the intelligence community. And he said, what do you think we should do? I said, no violent solutions, no crackdown. It has to be through dialogue. And all attempts previously to have social dialogue, a proper one that would result in a social contract that would be inclusive for everyone, had failed miserably because of the polarized discourse by political Islam and by the secularists who belong to an older generation of secularists, more of the French 1960s secularist movement in Egypt. So that the discrepancy between both lines of thought has more or less contributed to the problem. Neither of both ends will go anywhere. We've had some successes at the beginning of the revolution, that Tahrir Square was a place to bring everyone, and it was quite inclusive. The younger generations of the Muslim Brotherhood and of the leftist movement, we were all in one place. We were all very keen on transcending those old differences, the baggage. We asked everyone to enter Tahrir Square, leaving the old baggage behind and enter with a new soul. However, that did not happen because there was also a crack within the Muslim Brotherhood, the aspiration of the young and the political aspiration of the older hawkish generation. And that contributed to the continuous crack, the wedge that happened between the revolutionary movements and the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the solution is that the Muslim Brotherhood needs, which is only half of the political Islam spectrum. You've got the Salafis, which are Wahhabi, Saudi-supported groups, more or less forged by the intelligence community in the Middle East. But the Brotherhood is more or less the birthplace of political Islam in a contemporary sense. They need to reform internally. And I remember in early 2011, I met with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and she asked whether we thought that political Islam is a threat. And I said, do not repeat the same mistake you've done with Gaza when Hamas won the elections. If the Muslim Brotherhood succeed in ruling Egypt and turn things around and become democratic, it means only one thing: they were successfully reformed, because their current structures and literature does not support democratic practices. And if they don't, just let the rope loose and they will inevitably hang themselves, which happened. So I think what we really need is to create platforms for social dialogue, and which is not easy to do right now, because this space is confiscated by the state that does not want a dialogue to happen and a reconciliation to take place. So that's the challenge. And this is where philanthropy comes. And this is where we need to continue to have our sea, not our grave. So Nostre Mare does not become a mass grave for Arabs trying to reach the other shore. So what we should do is continue to support the innovative, creative networks of bringing young people from both sides of the Mediterranean and the world at large to continue the dialogue, be exposed. And look at the Tunisian Muslim Brotherhood, the Ghannouchi and the Nahda movement. They're very smart and savvy. They were able to take the blow and the punch and absorb it, unlike the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And it's because they lived in France and the UK for over 30 years. So they learned the democratic practices, they learned the rules of the game, so they were able to perform.
Thank you. Who else wants to come in on one of these questions? Munir, please go ahead.
Concerning philanthropy, what we need from philanthropy, in my sense, philanthropy teaches us, should teach us democracy inside our NGOs, because in the Arab world, as far as I know and as according to my experience, there is less democracy inside the NGOs, and there is some associative actors who are corrupted and who are corrupted like politicians. This is what we need first. The second thing is that we need also from philanthropy to show us how to build an inclusive society for everybody, and that reflects our diversity, not only that reflects the opinion of the majority. And here I come to the political Islam. And if you would like to hear my point, I think there is no political Islam. There is either politic or Islam, because politic is based on democracy and human rights, and Islam is a personal affair. So we leave people to live their Islam as they wish, and when it comes to politics, we need to give them to show them their responsibilities and their duties. And that's because politicians who are Islamists find a way to escape their responsibilities. I remember when I talked to Abdillah bin Kiran, the Prime Minister in Morocco, about the situation of disabled people. He told me in a letter, we support you even though we don't do anything for you as disabled people. I told him, listen, sir, we need public policies, not support from you. You are responsible and you are in the executive power. You should do political policy for people in your country. And this is the hardest about political Islam. They always find some path to escape from using the word of God and using the religious convictions, and it doesn't work for especially for social categories who are vulnerable, because they will be always in the back of the train if they will get on.
Thank you. Maria, maybe?
Sure. I think on your last question particularly, because I think that they've covered the other two quite extensively. I think that there are some things that are obvious with regards to what we can do to support. It's basic things as giving young people in particular a space around our decision-making tables, investing in creating employment opportunities, as well as just, give them the tools and platforms to tackle their issues. And I think, as the previous panelists were emphasizing, and also a space for dialogue. This is issues that their societies are facing, and they understand them better than any international experts or peacemakers, if you wish. Another thing is that money talks. I think that we have opportunities to not only increase funding and support, but to earmark it. I mean, give greater funding to those who push and support young people's participation in the region, and to those political leaderships who make space for them and are willing to make that space for them. And another thing I think is that we need to think creatively about this. I mean, we are not always able to enable participation physically, whether it's due to conflict or crisis or just a restriction of movement, but I think that we can think virtually. Something that we need to keep in mind is that, I like to say that the Arab youth is a very online aware generation. Over 30% of the population in the region, actively uses internet. And this is in comparison to, for instance, the Asian Pacific area, where you have about, I think, 20%, and in sub-Saharan Africa, about 13%. And another thing is, and I think this is also important to stress, perhaps to give a more positive, twist to this discussion, it's that indeed, we have failing societies in large parts of this region, but this also means that the social contracts that were there for very long are being dismantled, and if we want, they're being completely torn apart. As much as this causes despair and frustration, it also provides opportunities. I mean, I'll give you an example from Syria, which is an area that I particularly focus on. Before the conflict or the uprising, or whichever term we wish to use, there was practically no civil society. Now you have, I think the last study showed that we have about 1,000 civil society organizations active across the country. And these organizations are covering topics, from everything from equality, citizenship equality, gender equality, mediation, humanitarian relief, etc. And the point is that this, activism is actually providing some foundation for future democracy. And I think here we have to sustain our support to this type of activism if we're looking, to empower young people in the right direction, if I may say.
Thank you. Rasha, your reactions and to these questions, and also please do, share some of the conclusions from the Womidan Declaration that you mentioned.
I think regarding your question of what civil society and what different foundations and donors can do, we don't need just to limit it to the MENA region. We also need to work here. We need to show that I'm crossing the sea because my life is in danger, and not to take your job, and I do have a culture, and I'm not a threat to your culture. And if you think I'm a threat to your culture, then you have an identity problem. Really. It amazes me how the discourse is about they will come being Muslims, being Arabs, being Afghanis. They are coming and they are a threat to our culture. And we don't want them in our culture of freedom and openness. And it's a big problem. And I think there should be a revision of the discourse, a revision of what we call the question of identity, how I shouldn't feel threatened by this. The reason why for Womidan we decided to focus on women activism and empowering women activists is because we're trying to change certain stereotypes about the role of women, that you are needed at the beginning of the revolution, but once the dictator falls, you have to go back home. And we need to work on this. We need to work, some of the things that came in the declaration was on the top of which the safe environment for women and men activists. We need a safe environment where both can equally participate and try to create the social change that we're hoping for. And this is not just the role of civil society or the state, it's civil society, media, the state, it's joint work. We need to have a strong civil society that can monitor and can report without fear of being shut down or without fear of not getting approvals for getting foreign funds. We need the state to be accountable to what they say. We have, if you are going to follow the discourse of the officials in Egypt, they will say, this year is the year of youth, we are supporting youth, we believe that this country is not going to advance without the youth. And at the very same moment, you have hundreds and you have thousands. I'm not very familiar with the statistics like Ahmed, but we all know how it is now with youth in Egypt and most of the Arab countries. And we also tackled in the declaration the question of education, formal and non-formal, because we need an education that can break stereotypes. We need an education that can reduce gender gaps. We need an education that can say the woman can be in the square and she plays a role as equally important as the man. So we need to work on this. And again, the role of civil society, the role of foundations supporting this. And in terms of media practitioners, we talked about the responsibility of combating these stereotypes again. Last week I was in Egypt and I'm watching like most of the commercials during Ramadan, and it's just one slap on the face of women after the other. It's a shame that it's 2016, we're still having this discourse and this degrading language about women. And when it comes to gender equality and again, like being on equal foot and trying to come close to that, it's everybody's responsibility and it's in the interest of everyone. It's very important that we build solidarity, and it's very important that we know what is happening in other countries. that what is happening in Ukraine, I should know it in Egypt. Because as I said, I mean, when we went to the square, we didn't say, down with Mubarak, we want the Islamists, or down with this, we want the military. Our slogans are social, and we wanted social change. We wanted freedom, we wanted social justice, and we were asking for a decent life. I mean, we didn't call for a specific regime or capitalism or socialism or communism. And these are universal values. I personally admit that the revolution failed in Egypt, but the values, they can never go away. I mean, we will always keep fighting for these values. In Sweden, they are fighting for these values. In Egypt, in Somalia, everywhere. So we really need to build solidarity. We need to organize ourselves politically. I feel sad at how people are taking democracy for granted. And I'm talking about Sweden. And I think it's the case in most of European countries. I have a role. Every 4 years, I go to vote, maybe not the first round, and then, oh my God, the right wing is coming to power. Then the next round, I will go and vote. I mean, democracy is, we all know, and and we're really confident about this, especially after the Egyptian experience. It's not about the ballot box. It gives legitimacy, but it's not about the ballot box. I mean, yesterday in Sweden, the parliament, they passed a new law. Everybody's talking, about what a shame, and it's about limiting the rights of refugees. It's basically they are trying to make Sweden less appealing to anybody who would try to come to Sweden and go through the whole trip of going up north. And everybody's talking about how shameful it is. And it's a shameful day, and we will always remember it's a day of shame. I'm not surprised. You are not organizing yourselves politically. Politicians at the moment who are not right-wing are also playing the game of the right-wing. I mean, the law that passed yesterday in a parliament that has the majority of the social democrats, I mean, they are just afraid of losing votes. So, I mean, it just shows that the values of the Arab Spring are not just exclusive to Arab countries. In fact, they are really needed at the moment as well in Europe.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Well, I think with this, it's a very clear conclusion to this discussion, which I'm going to bring to a close, bringing out that, firstly, despite the situation, here are 4 people representing thousands of others who are still continuing, thousands, maybe millions of others who are still continuing the struggle in countries across the region. Secondly, has been mentioned again and again and again, despite the origins of some of the people on these panels, one shouldn't understand the debate about the prospects for the region when it comes to democracy, openness and equality as being only about the southern Mediterranean. It's been mentioned again and again that the young people and others also in Europe expressed immediately their solidarity when they saw the uprisings in the southern Mediterranean, because they recognized things that they see in their own societies as well, whether it be the growth of inequality, whether it be crony capitalism, corruption, feeling excluded from decision-making, or actually structures of decision-making which are almost deliberately made to exclude the people that they're supposed to be working for. And so we should be very clear, as Rasha said, that these are universal values, and young people and others across the whole region are mobilizing for them, and very much understand that they're not going to come in just one part or other of the region. We need to work across the borders. And the third conclusion, very clear, was that all of these people need your support, now perhaps more than at any point over the past 5 or 6 years. And so with that, thank you all to the panel. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.